Our next speaker is Lee Tarnay, and Lee is an ecologist with the Forest Service with Region 5, the Remote Sensing Lab. Before he was with the Forest Service, he was at Yosemite as an air resource specialist and has done a lot of really great modeling work, and it's always great to have air quality folks helping inform our work. So I'm just going to pull up your talk. You can come on up. Here's that.
Is this a pointer?
That's a pointer. Yeah. Let me see if, I don't know if we already had this up.
Okay, so that works.
Yeah, it does work.
There it is.
There it is. Okay, great.
Okay, I gotta calibrate my distance from the microphone here. It's the last talk of the day, so it's not? Oh, okay, good. I need to read the schedule. Okay, towards the end of the day, so I'll try not to keep it too long. I'm here to introduce you guys to how we deal with smoke in places where we get lots of smoke all the time. But the foundation of that experience for me was living for 10 years in Yosemite, where they did do a lot of burning while I was there, and I was the air quality specialist. Suddenly having to deal with smoke all the time, and having to deal with our current regulatory framework and make that work for trying to tell people what to do about smoke. So that's what this talk is about, and really trying to apply that knowledge and transfer that knowledge to you guys. And in the interim, since I've been away from Yosemite, we've been working on the tools to help people more intuitively understand what to do about smoke and provide better messaging about that. And then also just understand what it takes to deal with smoke in the long term and at the landscape scale. Because ultimately the smoke comes from the landscape, and managing the landscape is part of managing the smoke. So let's see. First of all, just the basics of why we are concerned about smoke. Most of what we're concerned about with smoke, at least anywhere far from the origination of the combustion, is the fine particles that are produced. And PM 2.5 is what they call it. There's two sizes that they measure for air quality. That's PM10, which is about 10 micrometers, and PM 2.5, which is 2.5 micrometers. And when I think the best analogy I've heard is that PM10 is like a giant truck trying to navigate a very windy mountain road. And most big trucks, if they go too fast, won't be able to make it around the corners. Whereas PM 2.5 is like a race car with good suspension, going as fast as it wants around the corners. And it can make it around the corners. It can make it into the bottom of your lungs. It can actually make it into your bloodstream. It's so small. So, and that's kind of the scale that we're talking about. We're working at the scale that's smaller than the human hair. And so when you're breathing in smoke, primarily what's making you cough and making you react if you're far away from the fire is that PM 2.5 that's getting down into the bottom of your lungs and into your potentially into your bloodstream. When you're close to smoke, acrolein and other gaseous components make your eyes sting, and that's what you'll notice first if you're near a fire. But when you're far from a fire and you're breathing that smoke, even if it's moderate, sometimes it'll irritate your respiratory system. And if you have heart disease, there are some conditions for which smoke can be dangerous. That's a smaller subset of the population. For the most part, it's just unhealthy, and it creates an immune response, an inflammation response. So you can kind of feel run down. You feel like maybe you're getting a cold. You've all experienced this. If you're around here, probably after a couple days of the smoke that you saw last October. And higher smoke levels equate to more impact. So the denser the smoke, the more you're going to feel it. And the longer you are in the dense smoke, the more you're going to feel it. So how do we measure smoke, right? So what do we do to regulate smoke? The EPA for a long time has been monitoring PM 2.5, and smoke is mostly PM 2.5 away from the fire. But their regulatory framework was for longer periods, for urban areas. And they have a nice scale and they've created this AQI, the Air Quality Index, which measures things at 24-hour scales, because that's where the health impacts were first measured, at 24-hour scales. They didn't have instruments that could measure enough smoke at shorter periods of time to really be certain that you were measuring different levels. So that resolution was only at 24-hour scales for a long time. And that's what the health information and the AQI are based on right now. So it just scales from good, moderate, unhealthy for sensitive groups, means that the people who are sensitive, who might have heart conditions or asthma, those people should probably curtail their activity, but the normal population is probably okay still. Unhealthy is unhealthy for all, and you probably all should think about curtailing your activity, but especially the people and the people who are sensitive should probably just stay inside. And then very unhealthy is just basically everybody just, try to stay inside and limit your activity outside. But notice that I had to say activity, right? And notice that during Craig's talk, smoke isn't at a constant level during fires for 24 hours. Has anybody ever seen it constantly at same level at 24 hours in a fire? Maybe in Santa Barbara. I saw some data at Santa Barbara. It was constantly high for about 24 hours, really even, due to the Thomas fire. But really, it varies across different times of day, and you should therefore probably vary your activity according inversely with the concentration of that smoke, right? And because activity is important too. You don't want to just be shut into your house for 24 hours if the smoke is going to spike for 3 hours during a day, and that's really what the kind of the equation. There's an equation for it basically that the health people go, but you want to be active outdoors. Being active is healthy for you. You should be doing stuff outside. But when you are, if there's smoke outside, you want to take it easy and not necessarily breathe so much if it's at the level that of concern. And then if it's really smoky, you want to just spend less time out there. But you've got to balance between sucking down too much smoke and being healthy and active outside, because we're humans and we can't just stay inside all the time. And that's really what we're talking about with some of the new products that are coming out from Air Now and EPA. They're not designed necessarily for regulatory purposes. They're designed to help you understand what you should do and when you should do it regarding smoke. So that's called now the NowCast. It's a sort of a 3-ish hour average, which smooths over some of the erroneous data that can sometimes appear at the hourly scale. It's still hard to measure fine particles at less than hourly scales. You get a lot of uncertainty the shorter the measurement time. But it's the basis for advising people what to do about smoke, and it's a basis for talking about the pattern of smoke over the course of the day. And so instead of talking about whether it's unhealthy or not, we really focus on trying to give people an idea of what to do with their activity level and how to minimize their exposure to the smoke, rather than just tell them, oh, it's unhealthy, and then you figure out what to do. And that translation from the AQI 24-hour categories and the hourly NowCast is right here. So it gives you more specific things to do. So if you're in that sensitive category, I'm a type 1 diabetic, so I don't like to go out when there's more than 30 micrograms per meter cubed of smoke. I'm not going to go for a run then usually. If you have to know your own sensitivities and understand where you are in that scale, if you're a sensitive group or if you're not. If you've been exercising or if you're going to go out and exercise, you're sensitive. Because breathing hard is part of that equation, right? More ventilation into your lungs means more particles get into your lungs. If you're a young kid and you breathe, every young kid breathes really heavily, so they're sensitive oftentimes. If you're elderly and your immune system is compromised or something like that, then you're sensitive. So, but you can be, normal, healthy people can go outside and do stuff and smoke, and it's fine. It happens, and you might get some irritation in your lungs. But if you have no sensitivities or weaknesses, then you'll just go about your business the next day. The duration of your exposures can sometimes be a problem. You can turn into a sensitive person after 6 days of really bad smoke. I think some people in the Northern California area have experienced that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So here is a graph that sort of juxtaposes those two metrics. So on the skinny bars right here, these are the hourly NowCast values, and these fat bars that are transparent are the AQI, the daily AQI values. And this is Napa, Jefferson Street, during the fires this last October. So this is October 10th, 11th, 12th, etc. And as you can see, the daily AQI is not a very good measure of necessarily what you should be doing about smoke, because the actual levels we're varying far under or over that during the course of the day, because fire makes really variable concentrations of smoke in the air. And so you can have a day that's an AQI of unhealthy for sensitive groups, but really that was because of a spike in the morning, and then moderate where you might have wanted to get outside and do something in the afternoon. So this pattern is really one of the keys to living with smoke, is understanding what pattern is going to happen, what patterns have set up, and understanding when and where the smoke is going to be. Uh-oh. Did I just turn it off? Oh, oh, there it goes. Okay. So it's very unhealthy. Yeah, it's all over. Anyway, so really it's about balancing. You have to find your fulcrum in terms of balancing that activity with the smoke that's around there. I'll go out when it's moderate. I probably won't run 5 miles, but I'll go out. So, but if you're really healthy, you can go out when it's unhealthy and for a little bit and emphasize activity if that's something you want to do to keep up your marathon training or whatever. It's your choice, and you have to understand your own sensitivities and talk to your doctor about it. But it's important that everybody, I guess, in a community where smoke is going to be frequent or more frequent, as the case may be, understands where they are on this and thinks about that beforehand and has the tools to gauge where and when the smoke is going to be at what level. And that's what I'm talking about in this next part, is really that there's a framework for understanding where the smoke is, modeling where it's going to be, and then messaging to people appropriately given a framework like this so they know what to do. And there's recently, in the last, since the Rim fire, there's been this, and a little bit before, there's been a program nationally where air resource advisors have gone to fires and helped using the information they can glean at the incident management camp, actually, and sitting next to the incident meteorologists, guys like Craig. He's not an incident meteorologist, but he's a meteorologist. And then also talking to the fire behavior guy and understanding where the fire is supposed to go and if it's supposed to blow up or not. Take those two things and kind of put them together and figure out where the fire is going to go. And so these one-pagers have been the result, and they tell you when and where the smoke's going to be. They tell you at what level it's been yesterday, so this will be the yesterday. And then they try to talk about the pattern of smoke that's going to appear for the coming day. And I think that's a real important tool, and it's the kind of tool that you need to really understand what's happening. And those are posted on the web on a daily basis during some of these big fires. And this is they give you the little graphic of the NowCast right here, which tells you what, it translates into the activity advice that I just showed you before. If you don't have an ARA around, and there's still a big fire, or you see some smoke around, there is this web URL right here, and you can go to this. It'll give you a map. It'll give you these NowCast values right here, and you can flip around from NowCast to AQI. You can even see how latent the latency and the delay that's happening from those monitors, which is actually kind of useful. And the graphs below that when you go to that URL will tell you where the NowCast is and what the baselines are for that particular monitor. Sometimes places get smoke, wood smoke during the night, and that's a common thing. And that'll tell you whether or not the measurements are useful. And then it gives you the daily AQI. And one of the little pro tip here, when you're looking at the NowCast graph right here, this black trace is the NowCast, and these little dots are the hourly. That hourly is going below the NowCast, then that's a trend downward, and that means it's getting worse. And if the little dot, the latest dot, is up above it, it's getting better. It's a good way to gauge about whether it's getting worse or getting better in your particular area or the monitor that represents you. When there's a fire, usually there's another monitor out, and this website will have that monitor so you can figure out which one is closest to you. Anyway, and then I guess on the other end of this is to talk about prescribed versus wildfire and using fire across landscapes and in our airsheds. It's important to understand that these prescribed fires are done in the shoulder seasons during periods when the fire is not likely to grow fast. And so the differences between impacts are pretty substantial. And this is just an illustration from Orleans where they did the TREX the TREX prescribed fire burns where you only saw a few hours at that unhealthy level, and the overall AQI was moderate. And that was actually the best day after some of the worst worst impacts in Orleans from the Wallow fire that was next door. So, and that's really the point, is that mega fire and the big extreme fires pack tens of thousands of tons of PM 2.5 into the air all at once. And I said it in words, I said it in the picture, and it says it in a graph here. But basically, this is the statewide emissions for the entire year for 2017. That this orange band is the level that was the daily level that you saw in the rimfire for most of the days of its growth. All of this red right here, and that was the level of emission you saw from the Northern California fires, 2 or 3 times the level of the rimfire. The wine country fires here amounted to about 2 times what you saw in the rimfire on a couple days, and the Thomas fire was about equal to the rimfire on a daily basis, packing a lot of smoke into one day. And what also is illustrated on this is the landscape scale strategy that Yosemite had been implementing for 10 years before that. These hash mark areas here were prescribed fires. These green areas here were wildland fires managed for resource objectives. And together those constituted a kind of catcher's mitt on the landscape that slowed fire down, and that provided a way for people to fight that fire before it went another 20 or 30,000 acres during the late fall, as the fire was winding down. Prescribed fire doesn't necessarily stop a wind-driven fire, but when that wind is gone, you have a lot of fire on the ground, and it takes a long time to stop it if your landscape isn't in the resilient shape that it can be in. Fires can stop a lot more quickly if they're surrounded by treatments. So even if the prescribed fire won't save you or save your trees, it can provide a landscape that isn't prone to further spread once the wind is gone. So thinking about that, this is a map of where I was looking at how that might work in this landscape. And there's a lot of different things about this landscape with fire ecology. So I don't pretend to know what to do. But what I can say is that if you can find ways of treating the landscape so that you slow down fire, that's also a strategy for helping air quality. And really healthier forests can mean healthier air, and landscape strategy should be part of your air quality strategy, in addition to the kind of hardening and education it takes to understand what to do about smoke when it is in your area, whether that be from fire, from wildfire, or from prescribed fire. The key is that you need to be able to understand. You need people who can tell you when and where the smoke's going to be, and you need the tools to understand what to do about that. And hopefully this talk has given you some of those tools. That's all. Oh, and here's the California Smoke Blog URL too. If you kind of see smoke in the air and wondering where it's coming from, just check that out. Oftentimes the answer will be there.
We have time for questions. Please ask questions. Lisa, we've got a microphone up here. Do you mind coming up? Sorry.
Hi. So I'm just curious about any other air quality constituents that might be of concern in a fire, particularly when it's not just a wildfire, but a lot of homes are lost. Because I know that particularly in the Sonoma Valley, people are really concerned about the toxicity of the smoke because of how many houses were in the air. And the follow-up to that too would be whether or not there'd be aerial deposition questions or concerns.
Certainly there are pollutants that can be toxic, that are volatilized when houses burn, and there's all kinds of toxics that can be generated for sure. And the typical monitoring that you're seeing isn't capturing any of that. So what all you're looking at there is just the particles, the fine particle, but not what's on those fine particles, and not necessarily the gases. I know that Air Resources Board did deploy some monitoring for other toxics and stuff like that. But I think Charles Nutter is around here somewhere, and he might be able to answer some of those questions about what they actually did specifically.
So volatile organics might be the biggest concern in that case?
Maybe. It just depends on when, where, and what was burning. Sure.
I was struck by the very last set of comments you made about comparing sort of prescribed fire, let's say, and mega fires. And I was wondering if air quality control districts are aware or have the same kind of attitude. My very limited contact with Forest Service is that they wanted to have fires, and the biggest obstacle was air quality control district.
We've been working with air districts for a while now, with CAPCOA, the Association of All Air Districts, and with individual air districts on an individual basis to really demonstrate these concepts with data. And I think those concepts are now taking hold, and we're starting to think about how we move to the landscape focus to limit air quality impacts in the long term as well as the short term.
He pretty much asked the question I had, so I'm just going to share a one-sentence anecdote of something I saw regarding air quality during the weeks when the fire was still burning in Santa Rosa. Everyone in Santa Rosa was wearing N95 masks, and I witnessed a young man who had his mask on, pull it down, take a good deep choke on a joint, and put it back up.
He didn't need the mask. Yeah, one thing, I had a toxicology professor in grad school, and one of the first thing he said in class is, if you smoke, don't worry about anything else I'm going to tell you about for the rest of the year. So.
I was just wondering, I noticed during the fire, like when we were evacuated, I'm a severe asthmatic. I would have loved to have had some access to this stuff, but it didn't even seem to be readily accessible. I mean, I could tell by the fire whether I should stay inside or out when I walked out the door of my KOA cabin that I was stuck in.
Oh no.
I mean, there wasn't really, and we were watching TV, but it was like the TV stations were just showing flames and flames and flames, and nobody was getting down to, should you stay inside? Should you breathe? Should you this? And
Don't
then all
breathe.
of a sudden, when the fire came down lower and nobody was paying any attention to it, then it was like, oh my God, wear N95. Oh my God, don't touch your ash. Oh my God, cover your shoes. You know, and I was just like, well, wait a minute. Well, if this is all bad now and it looked worse 4 days ago, what was I breathing 4 days ago when I was outside taking a walk?
That's why I'm here.
It was not an easy, but I mean, it wasn't like it was easy. I didn't find it accessible. Like the weather report or the fire report. I knew where the fire was, but I had no idea what the air was.
We've been suppressing fire for 100 years now or more on landscapes, and we haven't built the tools to understand what to do about smoke until recently, when we've had to really figure out what to do about smoke. The rim fire, all these mega fires, they're forcing us to do this on a grand scale that we've never seen before. And while we've sort of known what to tell people at local scales, the EPA hasn't had to figure that out and how to translate their regulatory framework into what to do about smoke framework. And so that's just been a recent development. And so all these tools are recent, and they change every year. In fact, that one pager that I show you is probably going to look a lot different this year, but most likely it'll be better because it'll get more to the heart of the questions that you had. So we're hoping that it's just going to get better, and we're chewing on this problem.
Time for 2 more questions. So Ali first, and then Shel.
So in that last couple slides, you made this comparison between land that had been managed in the Wildfire area and Northern California, and that doesn't really seem like a fair comparison because those are completely different areas with completely different vegetation types. So do you have data either on how smoke might differ between areas like within this region, chaparral or woodland or vegetation types we see out here that with different management histories, or more generally how smoke might differ between the Sierra Nevada and out here?
So are you saying that the different toxicities of smoke, or the different, do you think it's different toxicity or different unhealthy level? It's different from one place to another?
Sure, you said use the Wildfire as an example as a place where prescribed fire may have led to less toxic smoke versus the Northern California fires where there were much higher peaks and things like that. And those places might have different kinds of fire. I don't know.
So what I was the point I was trying to make with that was that basically, well, smoke is, for one thing, smoke is smoke. It gets more irritating and more unhealthy as you get higher in concentration. The more smoke you emit into the air in a given day, the higher the concentrations you're going to get. And so no matter where you live or what forest you are burning, it really what translates into higher concentrations and worse impacts for people is the amount of smoke that you get into the air on a given day. And what I was showing you there is sort of a comparison of an illustration for the rimfire of how much smoke went into the air a day, 5 to 10,000 tons of PM2.5, and then showing you how that manifested statewide for 2017, and using the rimfire as kind of that yardstick for how much went into the air for those given days. And then those graphs you saw with where it showed the Wallow fire was just a nice illustration where from a single site of the impacts of a mega fire where tens of thousands were going into the air on a given day, that Labor Day, versus when it's tens of tons of PM10 going into the air on a given day, and very little or very transient impacts where you've got lots of space and of time and space to avoid the smoke spike as it comes to you. And most likely, if it's a prescribed fire, you're going to hear about it, and hopefully as we get better and better at this, there'll be somebody to tell you when and where that smoke is going to go as well.
One more.
So Mountain North has said that we need on the equivalent of about 50 or 100 times as much area burned annually in order to get back to the place where we were in 1900. Mm-hmm. Which, when one thinks about, the graphs of the prescribed fire smoke effect and how little that might, adversely affect many folks, multiplying that by 100 on the shoulders of the fire season probably means that there's going to be a great deal more smoke in the air for a great deal longer period of time. And I just wondered what your thoughts might be with respect to, how we sell that idea politically, because I really believe that we need a lot more fire, especially in the forested parts of California. And I want to be able to, to sell that to the government. So what do I say?
Well, first of all, there's no fire alternative. So we're going to get the smoke one way or the other way, at least when there's some prescribed fire or managed fire that's managed for resource objectives going around the landscape. We'll know more about what's going to happen and when and where that smoke's going to be. So even if it's increased smoke, but at least we know when and where it's going to happen, maybe we're a little bit more forewarned and forearmed against it. So there's that concept. But there's also the concept that I think breaking up the landscape, these large landscapes with homogeneous fuels for miles and miles and miles, if you can break them up so that one fire can't burn 500,000 acres, but maybe it can only burn 200,000 acres, that halves the amount of time that you've got those giant mega fire inputs into the atmosphere, and therefore the crazy smoke impacts too. So, it's not that prescribed fire or any other kind of management of the landscape is going to supplant the wildfires that are going to continue to occur, but they can help limit. And then if we keep at it, they may transform the landscape back into a place that is much more resilient and less of an air quality issue.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, Emma.